When we begin using standards-based grading in our classroom, there are immediate instructional impacts. These impacts are things we really want to talk about with our colleagues, and we want to think about how we're going to present them to the students so that the students are able to work within the instructional guidelines. Because not only do teachers struggle with the habits that we've had from using the 100-point scale and making grading be the single motivating factor, but the students have the same habits. They have the same comfort zones. So when we begin using standards-based grading techniques, don't expect the students to immediately go along and go, "This is awesome." They're not going to do that. They're going to be frustrated just like we get. They're going to want it to go back to the way it was. They'll say things like, "Well, what was my grade?" And they'll be tempted to not respond to things or give things respect if it doesn't get a grade. Some students who are really used to that, "I'm doing this for a good grade" motivation, they're going to fight us on it. And maybe so will their parents. So we really want to think about communicating the instructional impacts to parents, to the students, and get a consistent language around it as a faculty if we want standards-based grading and ultimately reporting to be successful in our schools. So what are the instructional impacts? Well, there's no more zeros. So I need to think of a different way to give feedback to a child that they didn't do their homework. So there's no more, I can't just sit there and go, "Oh, you didn't do your homework?" 0. So what I have to say now is, "Oh, you didn't do your homework." Okay, homework is about personal responsibility. That's a disposition. So I might have a checklist from Kathy Vatterut, and the author of Rethinking Homework. And in that book, at the end, she has a list of checklists. And it has, I got the piece of paper home, I was able to have a quiet spot where I did the work, I was able to put the material back in my book bag, I was able to bring it into my classroom in a presentable manner. Okay, these are all the steps that it took, the personal responsibility steps to get your homework complete. How far did you get, and where did it break down? Because that data, and then what are you going to do to make sure that doesn't happen again? So now I'm giving feedback to the student on homework in terms of personal responsibility, not my math grade. Getting that piece of paper back and forth is not actually a math standard. It's a personal responsibility one. So if I'm going to give feedback on that, then I can say you are either at standard or you're approaching standard in terms of personal responsibility. So now I get to be transparent and clear about that. Well, parents need to know that that's how it's going to happen. Students need to know how that's going to happen so that they don't get frustrated. But it also means I'm not going to be able to take 10% off of the math, what we call product feedback, just because the process feedback had something that still needed to be learned. What's another instructional impact? Well, the punishment fits the crime. So again, back to the homework example. I don't want to say to a parent, "I'm giving your child a B in science because they didn't have personal responsibility." It's very hard for a parent to work through when they're trying to get their child necessarily into Berkeley College, for example. So we want to sit here and we want to say, your child can do all the science standards, because I want to tell you the truth. Your child can't do 100% of the science standards. But we need to talk about the process. We need to talk about their personal responsibility. Here is where they're actually not being successful, okay? They're at a 2.0. So we have to look at this and we have to come up with strategies on how we're going to help your child develop the skills they're going to need for the future. So now the parent isn't going to be arguing with me about my homework policies, okay, about how important homework is or isn't. They're going to be thinking, what do I need to do to help my child be successful? That's the target. So the instructional impact there is I don't mix up the feedback. And if I don't overtly teach the child how to do homework, then I shouldn't be giving it a grade. I teach graduate school. I'm still working with people on developing time management skills and personal responsibility. So there's no point in a K through 12 structure where you and I should be making assumptions about what the child should already be able to know how to do. They don't need to already know how to read at that level necessarily. They don't know necessarily how to get their homework done. They struggle with the same kinds of conflicts for their time as we do. So what's another instructional impact? Well, the focus is on revise, revise, revise. So I don't want us to get into the argument about, I gave a test. Do I have to let them do a retake? Then we end up in what we call, the retake cycle. I need to come up with time to have the children retake the test. I need to come up and have them actually go through new versions of the test. So I'm the one who's getting penalized here when I deal with retakes. I have to come up with more versions of the test. I have to actually come up with new time outside of class for them to take it. And then I have to grade them all. So I don't want us to get into the retake habit. What I'm talking about with revise, revise, revise is more the relationship between formative and then the summative experience. If I have formative assessments, the way Rick Stiggins talks about them, and I have one as a pre-assessment right in the beginning, and I don't have to say, kids, this is a test. I can say, let's take a look at what you're going to have to do by the end of this experience. Let's see where we are. We give them some feedback. Then midway through the instructional experience, we do it again. And we give the students more feedback. They should have seen growth if they were following their learning plan. They should be able to talk about what they know and what they don't know and revise their learning strategies or their technique in preparation for the summative. They've had 3 attempts at it. And a really good strategy here is to make sure that the formatives are harder than the summative. You don't want the summative to be where you figure out if a child can think. You don't want the summative to be where you figure out if they have courage. The formatives are where you want to do that. The summative, you want that to be 2.0 items and 3.0 items only from the proficiency scale. The summative, you want that to be an experience where they go, this was so easy. Miss, that was so easy, those questions. We were doing so much harder things in class. And you'll go, yeah. Because you were revising your practice and revising your technique. That's where I find out if you've got the courage to do deep and rich thinking. The summative assessment was just to find out if you were at standard. So this kind of instructional behavior, it impacts everything we do in our classroom. It means we're dedicating time to learning plans. It means we're dedicating time to children knowing what the target is and reflecting on how well are they approaching that target and what can they do differently to move forward. Another instructional impact is the fact that there are no zeros. And I don't mean just for homework now. I mean even in class. So what does that do to a behavior where a child says, I'm just going to take the 0? It's easy to take the 0. In standards-based grading, it's get it done. You are going to work here and get it done. You have to get it done. Don't expect students to thank you for this. It is so much easier to just kind of skip that project and not have to do it. So this is work. And they're going to have to put some kind of level. Now you can change the project to the point where you make it a 1.0 item. I can give you a complete sample. I can take it all the way to a 0.0 item, but it's get it done. Okay, so in that style now, we're changing this relationship where the teacher is more of an advocate for the learner. The teacher is able to provide the opportunities for them to be successful at whatever level on the proficiency scale it is that they need to be successful. The 100-point scale didn't give me that freedom. I had to get them. I couldn't make it unfair and let some kids get more information than others. Another instructional impact is the idea that the student is required to take ownership of the learning. So in standards-based grading, I'm not comparing you to the other kids. I'm never going to be grading on the bell curve, okay? So let's think about what that means in terms of instruction. What does it mean in the industrial model when a teacher has all their students get an A? What does that mean? Well, if I'm grading on a bell curve, or I have that as an expectation, the idea is, well, that teacher is too easy. Their tasks must be cake. Everyone got an A. So there's this idea that some students shouldn't be able to do that. That's all from the industrialized model. That's all from the idea that the purpose of this was to sort children. If I'm using standards-based grading and the job is to get all students at standard as a minimum, and if being at standard means that's the A, then a high quality or proficient teacher should be able to get every single learner to that point and get them to at standard given the time and the resources. So looking at that, if I am doing standards-based grading, the instructional implication is I'm going to get all children to be able to perform at standard. And that would mean all of my students can get an A. So these kinds of implications to the instructional model are something that we want to think about, and we want to make sure that our policies as a building match up, promote, and can help us sustain these standards-based grading practices and standards-based reporting.